Hi guys, welcome back. This week I'm going to be starting on something that I've been actually wanting to do for a really long time, but I've been kind of waiting for the right opportunity to present itself. And I also, as you know, like to kind of space out my videos in terms of time periods so that we don't get too much modern or too much kind of ancient right back to back with each other. But this week I'm finally ready to do it. This week we're going to be painting some cavalry, and I know a lot of people have been waiting for this. You've really wanted to see how to do horses, and it's something that I know I've overlooked for a long time. It is really important to a lot of people who are thinking about doing miniature painting. What cavalry have I chosen? Obviously cavalry existed in all different periods and throughout history. It was used a lot, and so, you could potentially pick out a cavalry unit from any number of different armies. But I have decided to go with kind of the most impressive and challenging choice that I can make in that regard, and that's not necessarily for your benefit, but for my own, because I like giving myself good painting challenges, and I'm hoping that, by showing you guys something that's really kind of complicated or has a high difficulty level, that will hopefully inspire you and make you feel like you can tackle projects like that. So what we're going to be doing this week, well, starting, I should say, this week, is going to be a Napoleonic era Hussar. Yes, that's right, a French Hussar. And if you guys know anything about Napoleonic French uniforms, especially cavalry, you know that this guy has one of the most complicated, fancy uniforms out there. So for me, I can't think of a better, more, interesting challenge. And this is going to be a two-part video because there's the horse to paint and there's the guy to paint, and they're both pretty complicated and there's a lot of work to do on both of them. So I'm going to break this down. This week we're going to be painting the horse, and next week I'll be showing you how to paint the Hussar himself. So I'll show you what I've got in terms of a figure here. This is our horse, as you can see. He's just been primed, and since obviously knowing how to paint the horse is the whole point of this tutorial, I haven't done any work on him yet, so that's what we're going to be doing later on. I'll just show you the Hussar 2 really quick. This is the Hussar unit we're going to be working with. This figure is by Perry, obviously. Well, obviously, I don't know why I say obviously, but they are pretty well known for their really fantastic Napoleonic range. So when I, came to picking a figure to use, I didn't really have any other choice, well, at least in my opinion. They're just the best when it comes to this, and so that's why I grabbed these. So, as I said, this week we're going to be looking at doing the horse, and with Napoleonic units in particular, reference material is really important because there's a lot of complex detail and you need to know what color to make everything. Luckily, a lot of stuff is online, so you can get ideas really well just from looking around. What I'm going to be using as a painting guide is this book. This is Napoleonic Uniforms by John R. Alting. Maybe you've heard of it, I don't know. It's a definitive volume. It's very famous. It was produced by an artist, or the works in here are basically sort of watercolors by an artist who was present in sort of the French camps during the Napoleonic War, and he very extensively made paintings and sketches of basically every single unit he saw. So this is actually a 2-volume work. This is only volume 1. There's a volume 2. They come in a sort of a really nice box, a slipcase. And there's literally hundreds and hundreds of different units and variants of units pictured in here. It's a beautiful book. It's a very high quality production. I'll just show you some examples. I'll show you exactly what I plan to paint, because they have all the Hussar units in here. Basically all of the regiments are in here in extensive detail, so it was great for me. I could look through it and find a scheme that I really liked. I'm going to be doing this one, so I'm going to basically be doing a Hussar from the 6th Regiment. I looked through all of them and I decided this one was the prettiest, but you can get a sense for what this book is like. It's a lot of beautiful, really finely done watercolors, just plates, and it's really a wonderful reference if you want to paint a lot of figures from this period. If that's something you enjoy and you don't consider it to be like, sort of an exercise in frustration, then this is a great book. It is very expensive. This is definitely not just something you pick up on a whim. This is a quality production, and it's enormously expensive. I actually bought it for my boyfriend as a birthday present several years ago, and he's really enjoyed it. So, you know, if you're really into the period and you just, you know, love this kind of thing, I would really recommend this book. Otherwise, you know, like I said, there's plenty of references online, or, you know, maybe you can find this at libraries or something like that if you would like to look at it there. So, I guess that's all I need to tell you for the moment. We're going to go ahead and get started working on the horse, and, yeah, I'll just let you know everything else we need to know as we go along. And yeah, next week will be the Hussar himself, so keep that in mind. Also, just one quick note, I've got a new camera. I don't know if you can tell, it's higher res, I think. Lighting's probably better. Yeah, it was a kind of a surprise also from my boyfriend recently for helping me make better videos. I appreciate that. Thanks, boyfriend. Let me know what you think, if the quality is good, or if you see any problems, because I'm still getting used to this new one, and, you know, so this may be a little bit of, you know, problem as I kind of work into using it. So let's go ahead now and get started painting our horse for a Napoleonic Hussar. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start base coating this horse. I chose brown for the color of the horse's flesh, and I did that mostly because it's a very common color for horses. You see a lot of brown horses, it's used a lot, and I thought it was a standard color that would be the most useful to the most people. And if it's popular, maybe we'll go back and cover black horses, white horses, spotted horses, other things. But I thought this was a good place to start. I am using the Bay Brown Triad from Foundry to paint this. So right now I'm just putting a really good heavy base coat of Bay Brown shade all over the horse and really being careful to cover all the areas. Another thing, if you're painting Napoleonic cavalry units, you should bear in mind that the color of the horse was often sort of connected to the type of unit. So these kind of light troops like the Hussar would have had brown horses. More heavy units might have seemed to have black horses a lot, and sort of special units like trumpeters or musicians often had white horses. So before you choose your horse color, at least with Napoleonic units, you should pay attention to see if there was a specific type of horse was used by the unit that you're planning to paint. And now I'm going to go ahead and apply a Nuln Oil wash very heavily all over the whole horse, but especially focusing on his belly and inner legs, just to further sort of darken up our base and add some extra definition in, you know, those sort of crooks and crannies that are where we really want a lot of shadow to be. Okay, so now we're going to start layering color onto our horse. And the main key thing to keep in mind when you're painting horses is that subtlety is key. You don't want stark, heavy transitions between the colors. Horse flesh will look the nicest when you have smooth, you know, even transitions between the colors. So you have to build up layers very gradually and transition very carefully. Now, as I said before, I'm using Bay Brown for this. And you could just go from the shade color to the medium color to the light color and maybe another color on top of that and just, you know, stop there. But the problem with, you know, that approach is that you're going to have to be spending a lot of time blending those colors to get them to transition smoothly together. And if you're doing other colors of horse, that may be even worse. That may be, like, say, a white or gray horse, that's going to be even more the case. You're going to be spending a lot of time doing blending to make sure you get that smooth transition you want. An easier approach is to mix sort of intermediate colors. So I'm starting out here by mixing the Bay Brown shade with the Bay Brown medium. I'm applying that as a layer. Then I'm going to move on to just plain Bay Brown, and then I'll go up to Bay Brown medium mixed with Bay Brown light, and then I will do Bay Brown light after that. And so you're adding these extra gradual steps, and that makes building up a subtle transition much easier. And you may say, well, that's more work. I'm having to put more paint coats on the horse. Well, it's actually not a lot more work if you compare it to all the time you're going to have to spend blending those colors that are more dissimilar with one another. It kind of works out to about the same amount of time in the end. And it's much, really, arguably a lot easier to just apply those extra steps than to try to get the fewer number of colors to blend together well. As a matter of fact, if you do this well, this technique well, especially on a brown horse, as brown is a very forgiving color, you're not actually going to have to be doing very much blending at all, only on sort of the large surfaces like the flanks of the horse and its neck, and a lot of, like the legs and a lot of other places, the colors are so gradual that they'll transition really nicely, and you won't really even have to do very much work. And basically, what you need to be doing is as you become increasingly lighter in colors, you're going to want to cover increasingly smaller areas of the horse's skin. And after I finish the Bay Brown Light, I'm actually going to then add Bay Brown Light mixed with some Spear Shaft Medium, and then a final high highlight of just pure Spear Shaft Medium. And with those upper range colors, you should really be focusing on the fine musculature of the horse. Don't start picking out those really fine ripples and bulges in its flesh until you get up to that higher range of colors, because you want those bumps and bulges to be very subtle. You don't want those to be very stark. You reserve the stark color differences for, sort of the areas around the horse's bottoms of the horse's feet, and around his where it transitions with his leather harness, and under his stomach and inside his legs, which you hardly even need to paint at all, or the backs of his legs. Leave those areas really dark, and just reserve the high highlights for those areas where it's the light's really hitting the horse kind of from the top, and where you just want to show very sort of subtle differences. And the pure spear shaft particularly, try to keep the usage of that to a minimum. Be very sparing with its application. But if you put it on right, it will really make the horse pop and give a really nice emphasis to the otherwise darker brown horse. Next, I'm going to go ahead and paint the mane and tail. This is actually quite easy. I'm basically using overbrushing here, which I've discussed before, but essentially you're taking some color, kind of wiping a bit of it off your brush, and then very lightly applying it so that it only hits kind of the high areas of what you're painting. That works very well on something with a lot of sort of deep sculpting in it, like the horsehair. And I'm going to be taking all three colors of the Bay Brown Triad and basically applying those to the high areas of the hair. And mostly in the light colors like Bay Brown Light, I'm really going to use sparingly and really only put it on sort of the very top areas of the mane and tail, and not really so much at the sides, as you'd expect, lighter on top, darker on the bottom and sides. Then finally, when I'm finished with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give both the mane and tail a wash of Agrax Earthshade, which I often do with sort of hair or fur because it helps unify the colors, and in this case it'll actually also help warm up the brown tone a little bit. After finishing the mane, I decided to give my horse some socks. You don't have to do this. This is kind of an individual thing per horse, but a lot of horses do sort of have some extra markings, so you can kind of apply them if you want to. I'm going to give my horse 2 socks on 2 of his feet, and I'm also giving him a little white mark on his nose because I like this. It adds a little extra character and personality to the model. It's pretty easy to do. I'm just going to use the Foundry Arctic Gray Triad, and I'm going to just kind of apply the 3 colors successively, and building up to the white, which I am going to, sort of only apply on the higher areas and not worry so much about where it's kind of on the inner leg, because that's shadowed and it doesn't really need to be highlighted very much. This is a very quick process. You can, because it's a small area, you can highlight it very fast, and it's just a nice way to make your horse a little bit more interesting. Okay, now we're going to start working on the gray and kind of black areas on this horse, which include his hoofs, but also his bridle and all of his tack and stuff, which are kind of a black, gray, leather color. And that's actually rather difficult, as I will explain in a minute. The first step, however, is to make sure you get a good base coat everywhere, and you need to be very careful with this. You know, do a good job, because you don't want to be messy, especially when you're painting the bridles and stuff, that you get good smooth lines and that your edging is good. And if you take good time here, spend your time making sure you do this neatly, then when you go and put lighter colored layers on top, you won't have to worry very much, because you can do that significantly faster. But the base coat is really important. You can see also I'm painting his eyes black. Horses, you know, with people, I often skip the eyes because, well, they're so small, as I said, it's hard to paint them in scale without them looking ridiculous and doll-like and kind of silly. So I just don't do them. On horses, their eyes are substantially bigger, so you can't really skip over them. But when you are painting horse eyes, you definitely don't want to put any white in their eyes. You really, you know, a horse is really only going to show the whites of its eyes if it's terrified or panicked or, you know, mad or something like that. Otherwise, you're not going to see the white part of their eyes. So I like to just paint their eyes a solid black color to start out with. You can also put some brown around the edge there if you want, or whatever. But definitely avoid white in the horse's eyes. They will look the most realistic if you know, you just stick to dark colors. And once the base coat's on everywhere, I'm going to go ahead and start highlighting all the leather tack and also his hooves using charcoal gray, medium. And I'm just going to sort of focus this on areas that I sort of want to be shinier, or where I know there's going to be light hitting. You can be pretty generous on his hooves, though, because hooves are usually, especially on a darker colored horse like this, are going to be kind of just a darkish gray color. They're not really going to be black, so you want them to be a little lighter. But on the leather elements, just kind of blend it out a little bit, but try not to put it every single place. Okay, so now I'm kind of getting into the hard part here, which is painting sort of highlighting the hooves and then painting the black leather tack. Black leather is a real pain in the butt, because if you just leave it really dark, it will look dull, whereas most black leather is actually pretty shiny and reflective, and it has high kind of contrast. So you get the best black leather when you add these sort of shiny, high contrast patches, which you need to achieve by blending much lighter shades of gray into the very dark black, and by doing that, you're going to give the illusion of shininess. Unfortunately, that's a real pain in the butt to do, because you're having to blend a very dark color with a much lighter color, and that is always difficult to get a good transition on that in any sort of reasonable amount of time. What I am going to be doing here is, we already applied that charcoal gray medium color, but now we need to get even higher highlights. The best thing you can do here is, you want a lot lighter gray shade, but you need to build up to it. So I'm going to take the Arctic gray Arctic gray shade color, and I'm going to mix that in with the charcoal black medium color, and I'm going to, in that way, kind of generate a slightly sort of in-between color, and that's going to make the transition less painful. I'm going to be doing a lot less blending. So you're going to want to apply that to areas on sort of in the middle of the bridle and stuff where you want a lot of light to hit. So you think about, shiny, so you think it's kind of dark, and then where sort of on the parts that kind of are the highest, or where you expect light to hit, that's where you want to blend out sort of areas of that lighter gray and kind of transition it out into the darker black on either side. Once you've done that, you can go ahead then take just plain Arctic gray shade and use that to get even more high contrast. And I have thinned it down quite a bit, and I'm using it as an edge highlight. You don't have to put it on both edges, but kind of think about focusing it on the top edges of the straps. So just kind of along one top edge where there's really light hitting it. And that will really give the impression that it's really extra shiny In some places you can even, you know, where we've already applied that sort of mix shade, you can go ahead and even lightly blend some of the just pure Arctic gray into the very extreme middle of that to make it look even shinier. And this is just a lot of, you know, this is a little fussy. You just have to spend some time blending. You have to be a little bit careful. And yeah, just take your time. And when I'm done, I also like to go back with just some pure white even, and I'll use that, not everywhere really, but just, I'll use it as an edge highlight on areas where that should be really shiny, like the straps across the top of the horse's head and sort of those kinds of places. I'll make the edge highlight extra bright, basically. His hooves, I'm handling in a very similar way. I've basically used that same transitional color to lighten them up and sort of just blend it outwards, and also a little bit of just pure Arctic gray. But it's substantially easier there because you basically want them to be sort of just a nice medium gray color, and you don't have to worry about getting that sort of shiny effect that you need on the rest of the leather areas of the horse's tack. And then when I'm done with all that sort of highlighting of the leather areas, I'm going to go back in with some non-oil wash. I'm going to carefully apply it to all of those leather straps and harnesses. And that just will help kind of serve to unify all those bits. It will sort of bring a little bit more black into the leather so that it doesn't look like it's really just white or gray. You know, it'll help, you know, it just evens the color out a little bit. So that's why I really like doing that. The other thing that I'm then going to do really quickly, since I've already got the white paint out, I'm going to take and put a teeny tiny little white dot sort of in the middle of the horse's eye. Now this is not making showing the white of the horse's eye, because I said before that's not a good idea, but what it is doing is sort of putting a little reflection, you know, a little shiny spot onto the eyeball, and that will really make the eye pop out. It will make the horse look alive. It'll make it look real. If you just leave the eyes flat black, it's just kind of going to look a little scary and, you know, look like it's possessed or something. But if you put that little kind of light spot in the eyes, then it'll get the feeling that the horse, you know, is, you know, really there. At this point, I'm going to start in on the horse's saddle and sort of saddle blanket, that sort of thing. He has sort of a furry kind of cover to his saddle here, whatever. That's sort of a hussar thing. This particular regiment of hussars, the fur is white colored, so I'm going to start out by first base coating it really thoroughly so it gets down in all the crevices with Arctic gray shade, and then I'm going to apply a non-oil wash, but make sure you thin that down quite a bit before you put it on, because you want it to be a really subtle wash. You don't want it to be too overwhelming or too high contrast. And now it's time to start highlighting this sort of saddle cover, and because it's basically a fur type surface, we're going to be using overbrushing again. I'm going to be starting out with the Arctic gray medium color, and as usual you can see I'm wiping most of the paint off the brush and then using a very, very light touch to very carefully smooth it over the fur surface. And usually what you want to do is you kind of want to wipe your brush sort of perpendicular to the direction of the hair or the fur, if that makes sense. So since this fur is kind of shaggy downwards, I'm going to kind of be moving my brush across the fur, and that way you will ensure for the best that you can that you don't get any paint down in the crevices and it really stays on the surface. Once I've applied the Arctic gray medium shade, and I'm going to be fairly generous with that, I'm going to go back in with white, and I'm going to thin that down quite a bit, and I'm going to start then doing exactly the same thing, but I'm going to concentrate it really on just surfaces that I want to be lighter, more towards the top and, front of the fur, since it's got so many curves in it. and certainly around, especially around sort of the top and bottom edges as well. And I'm going to go back over, as you can see, and build up several layers in places so that I can get some areas to be really brilliantly white. Because when you're painting a surface like this, you don't have as many options for achieving contrast without really going to a ridiculous amount of trouble. So, you know, this is probably one of the most reasonably fast, effective ways that you can get a surface like this, you know, to look like it's, you know, it's nicely painted. Now the saddle cover has sort of a triangular trim along the edge of it, and in this particular regiment that is painted red. In order to do that, I'm going to base coat everything carefully using Citadel, Mephiston red. And that's, yeah, just be a little careful here so you don't make a mess on the nice white furry saddle. And then I'm going to go back in with Cardboard Crimson Wash, and I'm going to apply that also very carefully over the top to sort of darken things down a bit. Then finally, I'm going to go back in with Evil Sun's Scarlet, also from Citadel, and I'm going to just sort of very carefully use that to sort of highlight sort of the tips of the sort of the points of all these little triangles. And that's really all you need to do, because they're such small, these are such small areas, they don't really require any additional highlighting. Okay, now for the bedroll. This particular regiment had a nice, really kind of nice bright blue, not exactly sky blue, but you know, kind of like in that direction of blanket. I'm using a base coat here of Foundry Deep Blue Medium, and I'm going to apply then an Azurman Blue wash over top just to sort of darken my base down a bit. After that, it's really just a question of some blending, but it's quite a small area, so it shouldn't be too challenging. The medium shade I'm going to be using will be a combination of Deep Blue Medium and Tomb Blue Shade, and you just want to blend that out from sort of the top, kind of working down and around so that it stays dark around the base of the roll. You can then go ahead after that and highlight it with just pure Tomb Blue Shade, you know, just and sort of doing increasingly less as you get to the top, or I mean starting at the top and working out. And then I will even use a little bit of Tomb Blue Medium, and I'm going to use that as a very sparing extreme highlight on the top, and also sort of as an edge highlight sort of around sort of those divides in the blanket where there's those black leather straps are holding it in place. That kind of will make it stand out just a little bit more. And yeah, and don't forget to do the ends of the saddle blanket as well. What I did was I sort of did a gradient downward, so I applied increasingly light colors towards that sort of the top of that inner circle area and left the bottom area rather darker. And now next I'm going to tackle the trim on the blanket roll, and on this regiment it's a yellow color. So I'm going to base coat the sort of the trim using ochre shade from Foundry. And then I'm going to take ochre light and apply that over top as a highlight, sort of a medium highlight. And then as a high highlight, I will be using Boneyard medium, because that is going to give it a slightly more shiny effect, not make it look just like such garish yellow. And I'll even then go ahead and take Boneyard light as a really extreme edge highlight, sort of on the tops and sort of on the bottom inner edge, so it looks like a little bit of light is catching there. If you're feeling particularly clever, you can also paint the regimental number on those little side circles. It's a very tiny amount of room, and I had to actually mess around a little bit here to get these to look right. I ended up actually doing it with a number 0 brush because it's so small. This is one of those few times where a small brush actually works a lot better. What I would recommend you doing if you want to try this is don't try to actually make right out of 6. It won't work very well for you. What's a little bit easier, try to sort of make a little B shape in there. So make sort of a straight line down, and then make a sort of a dot, or around sort of a dot on the front of that. And then you can go ahead and highlight that as you would the rest of the trim. And that's, it's not, you know, it's sort of roughly the shape of a 6. It'll give a good indication. And, you know, it's just a lot easier to paint. And
because basically actually writing the number there would be virtually impossible. Okay, so now really the final detail that we need to take care of here is to paint a few very small areas of hardware that are on the horse's sort of bridle. They're pretty obvious where they are, and I decided that I would go ahead and do these in sort of a bronzy gold color. I don't know, I've seen kind of silver, I've seen bronze, but I decided I like this better and I just go with this. So I've basically base coated these areas using a mix of Vallejo, German camouflage, black, brown, and bronze. That's the base coat. And then I go ahead and highlight those further with just plain bronze, and then just a bit of Vallejo gold on sort of the top edges to make them extra shiny, but not too shiny, because these, you know, this is not, you know, these are kind of more brass. They shouldn't be, you shouldn't make them feel like they're really shiny gold, because this is not like an officer. This is your kind of average normal hussar. Okay, so here is our finished hussar's horse. I know this video actually kind of ran rather long, considering the relatively few elements that are actually on this figure, but I thought it was really important to really be thorough in discussing the technique involved in painting a horse, because it's not something I ever talked about before, and I wanted to really show you very well all of the steps involved, particularly in painting the skin, because I know that is something that a lot of people struggle with. So, you know, I hope you found this helpful. It gave you some idea about horses. You can really do pretty much the same thing with most other colors. I suggest if you're starting out with horses, begin with browns or different shades of brown. White and gray are particularly difficult. You can move on to a black color next. That's not too difficult. If it ends up gray, that's fine too, because a gray horse, black horse, they all look good. But I'd say start with brown, try a black horse next, and then work towards white. I may be doing tutorials on some of those in the future if people are really interested in seeing those. The other thing we did here, of course, was cover how to paint black leather, which, as you saw, is quite a tricky proposition. So I hope you also found that to be useful. If you enjoyed this video, as usual, please like it, share it with your friends. Please do subscribe to my channel if you want to keep seeing more of these, and leave me your comments with what you thought. And please, definitely, I want to hear what you thought of my new camera, if you noticed improvement, if you like it better, if you find it less good. And it's also higher res, so that should definitely be nice. And so basically, I think I will see you next week when we will be working on the second part of this video, which is going to be painting this hussar himself, who we're going to put on the horse. Okay, so I will see you next time.